All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. In the last week and a half, the Reds won 6 out of 7 games. They just polished off a 4-2 homestand. So why did it feel as if a dark cloud had descended on Great American Ballpark on Thursday afternoon when that series ended against Seattle?
Let me tell you the story I was going to write on Thursday if the Reds took care of business.
Please.
I was going to write the Reds finally win the type of game that they found ways to lose last year. And if this season's going to be, going in the direction they want it to, it's about games like that. Now, I'm not expecting I still think Ellie is a very good defender at short. I think Graham Ashcraft is going to be able to field a bunt. I think that Espinal and Austin Wins are going to catch pop-ups. I don't see a Pagan solid. I don't see any of these being like long, serious concerns that we'll be talking about in September. But it's games like that and kind of moments like that where while the Mariners post-game were talking a lot about, the will of this team, of course, put as much stock of that into it as you will. The Reds still have to show that they're ready to win that type of game.
I agree with you 100%. The reason eyebrows are raised at Great American Ballpark is, again, the conversation and the dialogue in the offseason about eliminating some of these types of games, some of these types of mistakes. 4 errors in the game, 6 unearned runs for Seattle in the game on Thursday. So that's why it's discussion worthy. And now the Reds, after that series against Seattle, now you head out for what will be one of the longest road trips of the season that starts in Baltimore. And we'll talk more about their weekend in Baltimore in just a bit. With that, we say welcome to Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Chaz, back on the road. I can see you have your first day of the series button-down collared shirt on.
That's right.
As we record on Friday. So you're locked in and ready for this series and to get some crab cakes as well.
I have like 4 of those specific shirts.
Oh, good.
One's like orange and blue, one's green and blue, one's white and blue, and this is the purple and blue one.
Okay.
I like blue.
I know, I could tell, but you look great, and I know you're set for a good weekend. So coming up on the show today, we've got comparisons drawn and what may be a parallel path in some ways for Hunter Green and Ellie De La Cruz. Also, the Reds' new bench boss, Terry Francona, and his dealings with the guys calling balls and strikes. That relationship, the dynamic that's being created or has been created over all these years for that relationship. That's coming up, but let's start with this on the lead. One of the things about that game on Thursday at Great American Ballpark is the big swing from Jake Fraley that swung the momentum that gave the Reds the lead and then set up Emilio Pagán to try to close things out for the Reds and get them out of there with a series win and literally have them take defeat or take victory from the jaws of defeat, given how that game had played out up to that point. And I want to mention Pagán because as we've talked throughout the start of the season, as the Reds started without Alexis Díaz, Pagán clearly, in all of the best ways within the framework of being a team player, has said, I want this gig. I want to be the guy at the end of the game to shut things down and close things out. What have you seen from Pagán, and what have you heard about Pagán in that role?
There are a lot of examples that you could make up or create or look for across the league where, all right, a guy fills in as the closer when the former closer's on the injured list. The former closer comes back, kind of gets eased into that role. The part-time closer has a bad outing, and then the full-time former closer kind of takes that back. Well, that's not where I see this going with Alexis Díaz and Emilio Pagán. A couple things with Emilio. One, we learned the other day from Terry Francona that heading into the season, the guys he was thinking about for the ninth were Pagán and were Ian Jabot. Francona prioritizes strikes in the ninth inning, and those are the 2 real strike throwers that he was looking at in that section of the bullpen. And then, of course, nothing against Jabot's season, but what Pagán has done is show some real life behind his fastball. I'll always remember him blowing it by Julio Rodriguez. He's able to do that this year, not last year, because he's healthy this year. Again, he slipped up in the ninth. We'll talk more about Diaz too, but Pagán had enough job security entering Thursday to where roles aren't going to change based off one game.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And the Diaz conversation is coming, but how has his Pagan, well, when I say his, how has Pagan's, declaration and the way that he's taken to this role, how is that played in the clubhouse? And what have you heard from guys about their faith or their belief in Pagan's ability to close games?
Pagan was coming off sports hernia surgery coming into 2024. He felt like he had no base, no foundation under him. And that kind of got chipped away at different points last season. He has all of that entering 2025. Pagan said he's able to repeat his delivery, which is huge. I kind of asked around, kind of around the bullpen about Pagan and what he's doing. A really sharp guy, Scott Barlow, Reds reliever, he spoke here about what it is that makes Pagan as effective as he's been over the long run of the season.
But yeah, I always enjoyed watching him throw. Always liked his mechanics because a little different with the leg kick. Well, just because like with him, he with his back foot especially, like he drags it better than anybody I've ever seen in my life. So it's cool like when we go out there and anybody throws a touch and feel, especially when he throws one, seeing it when it's maybe not at like 100% effort. It's he's just getting his work in and stuff and kind of slows it down a little bit so I can see it, but he's still executed perfectly. But it's just really good.
Does the back foot drag help with like extension? Is that what that does? Or
Some guys do. It's kind of like a 50-50 thing. Some people do it, some people don't. Some people like Tony, he almost does like a mix of both, where his foot comes off and then comes back down. But he's one that drags it the whole way through, and I think more so it's like almost like a rudder on a ship for him. Keeps him in line a little bit longer. But he said he's done it his whole life.
I love that idea of the rudder on the ship. All that kind of stuff, again, is the key for Pagan being as consistent as he's been. Yes, I know he allowed 2 homers the other day, but he still was throwing strikes in the first pitch as well. The first pitch in particular was well located. The consistency of that mechanics is huge for him. And that brings me to Alexis Díaz, where the inconsistency of his mechanics have been the story of his season.
Yeah, and listen, when he came back, I've talked to Diaz a couple of times kind of on this process of being back, and he said all of the right things, certainly along the way, and I think he kinda knows the dynamic of what's happening right now with him being out. On the day that he came back, Terry Francona asked specifically about Diaz coming back right away to the closer role, which sometimes managers, teammates believe in that old adage, you don't lose your spot to an injury. But Francona said about Diaz, he said, quote, "We're going to pitch him where we think it makes sense right now." And then he said a second phrase that he added to that was, "We'd like to get him some confidence." So Diaz has come in since he's been back in some of those roles or innings or situations that largely are unfamiliar to him the last several seasons. Where does this stand now with his comeback and maybe what the plan or the path for him might be?
Well, first, Diaz has the best stuff in this entire bullpen and probably the best pure closing. I mean, he doesn't have, I guess Barlow has the most closing experience, but you know where I'm going with that.
Mhm.
He's the most closer-y of all of these options. But he's not there right now. He came back, he couldn't throw strikes in his debut, and he couldn't hold runners. His second game a bit better, but he still allowed that one piece of loud contact and had to work around some damage. Diaz is in a strange spot because, all right, I keep an updated running file of a bullpen depth chart, 1 through 8. Where are these guys based on how Francona is using them? All right, so you have, and I'm going to pull it up. I've got it right here. You've got your Emilio Pagán and Tony Santian are kind of in a tier of their own. Ashcraft is in a very high tier as this hybrid guy, the way they're using him. Jabot has been used in more high leverage situations during the course of the Mariners series than Alexis Díaz was. And then you have Taylor Rogers and Brent Suter are your lefties. Suter's your long man. Rogers, they've been using situationally. So then you've got left, it's Barlow and it's Diaz. And Barlow, and you can say the same thing about Jabot, provide elite availability. And not saying that about anything about Alexis, but Barlow and Jabot are the type of guys who will take the ball, or who do take the ball and fare well, coming in with runners on second and third and 1 out in the third inning, or it's a clean inning in the eighth. Barlow and Jabot aren't great, but they do have that kind of feel to be able to jump right into any specific situation. Well, with Diaz, he is a clean inning guy. he hasn't had that experience of, I've got to get hot quick now for the fifth, with the unpredictability of that role. So he can't yet right now provide the same kind of fungibility as Barlow and Jabot do. So Diaz, of course, he has that upside, but it is kind of tricky finding what role he fits into now to kind of get back up the bullpen pecking order.
Well, we'll see where it goes. Clearly, he is back, and now that's going to continue to be a story, how he's used, if he moves, what kind of belief and faith he garners from Terry Francona and Derek Johnson and the staff along the way, because you're going to have opportunities to think it a different way. You know, Emilio Pagán may rip off now the next month and a half of great baseball. The Reds certainly hope so. And still, though, it's going to be, you have a guy that you said is the most closery of the bit of the bunch. What are you going to do with Diaz? So that continues to play for the Reds. In terms of injuries right now, Reds got Austin Hayes and Matt McLain back. Obviously, Christian Encarnacion-Strand is now on the injured list. Hopefully that's not, a long time, but who knows? And with Tyler Stevenson still out, by the way, Stevenson will join the Louisville Bats this weekend as they're in Columbus, and he'll work out there and then start with games. If all of that goes well, he'll start with games early next week. I actually ran into Pat Kelly in Columbus, which is always a pleasure. Anytime you get to run into PK, he was excited to see Steve-O, excited to work with him. He also had some thoughts on some other guys, but Pat Kelly, not really a hockey guy, but he found himself at a Blue Jackets game because his team was in Columbus. So we wish PK nothing but the best this season. But that's where Stevenson's going to be to start. So anyway, all of that to say that this is the first time this season the Reds have had Hayes, Lux, McLain, most of those guys together. And so let's start with the idea in the offseason and acquiring Hayes and Lux and the pieces of the puzzle and how they might fit here. Outfielder with power, that was the biggest need for this team. It took Austin Hayes 3 games to give you a pretty good look at that power through Thursday, already second on the team with a couple of bombs in his first 3 games back. What about reinserting that to the lineup? It kind of feels like it couldn't come quickly enough.
The Reds entered this offseason knowing exactly what they needed, which was more help in the outfield specifically. And I know Lux isn't a true outfielder. He's been playing a lot of that, but it's a Reds team that knew exactly the type of profile they had to add, while recognizing that the market for those types of players in free agency exploded. The Michael Conforto contract with the Dodgers was kind of the canary in the coal mine with that. They also,
wait a minute, the canary in the coal mine?
You've never heard that?
I don't know that I've heard that one, and I could not let you continue without asking for some clarification on the canary in the coal mine.
The listeners, I think, will be on my side of this one. No offense. I think I know what it means.
Untaken.
It's like when you're in a coal mine, I think, and the birds stop singing, it means that they've died and the air quality is at a point where you should get out. I think that's where it goes back to, but it's like in the vernacular.
Okay,
it's bad things are coming.
Okay. Continue, please, but thanks for the clarification.
They feel like they did the best they could with the budget they had, and with the fact that on the trade market, Luis Robert didn't get dealt, and they were asking for the sun and the moon. Taylor Ward didn't get dealt because the Angels didn't really want to be sellers, and maybe you would have to have given major league pieces back in return in that deal. So they kind of had to get creative, and their creative approaches were Gavin Lux, a guy who's taking professional quality at-bats, and he was a top 20 hitter during the second half of last season, but he hasn't gotten hot yet, and you'd still like to see more true upside from him. And then Austin Hayes, and listen, the weakness of the Reds front office over the last 5 years has been their lack of hit rate, their low hit rate on position player free agent bats, and Hayes looks like a very big hit. And looks to be exactly what they needed and what they were looking for. Obviously, you need more help around him, but you already saw the Mariners game planning around Hayes. That's the kind of presence he's been in this lineup and kind of backing up what he showed in spring training.
Yeah, through Thursday, Lux, though, going back to him, team high 8 walks, team high on base percentage. Had some big hits along the way. Certainly his hit for a little bit of average as he started to round into form has Gavin Lux. But yeah, the lineup feels different with Austin Hayes. And I think the expectations were high from the start, but it already feels different with him there. And the Reds look a little bit more formidable offensively, which they need with this lineup kind of rounding into form like that.
One more thing about Hayes, like Hayes again, we'll see what kind of season he has, but what is he right now, and what do the Reds view him as right now? I really do feel like Hayes' return took some pressure off of Ellie De La Cruz, who looked like he was hitting with a lot of, and Ellie's going to be just fine, but a lot of pressure, a lot of I've got to be the guy in a lineup that doesn't have it yet. I did see some of that from Ellie. I think I saw a lot less of that on Tuesday. Thursday was just a poor game from Ellie that Ellie will be fine. And we can talk more about Ellie too, but Hayes has that type of return of that type of weight that, all right, I did notice a difference with Ellie after both Hayes and McLean were back in the lineup.
Well, let's turn right there right now, since you brought it up. For De La Cruz, yes, no one, I don't think people get down on Ellie De La Cruz. You can't get down on a player that talented, that good. They just, I think, watching De La Cruz sometimes have the game that he had. Being young is always going to be something that comes up in the conversation, being inexperienced, but the expectation level on the bar has been set so high with what he does or how he's expected to carry this team. Anything stands out. And I think people expected under Terry Francona, certainly there was a focus in spring to eliminate some of the things that we've seen from De La Cruz and everybody else in the lineup so far this season. But when you're Ellie De La Cruz, you catch a lot more eyeballs on everything that you do. So with a couple of games, with some errors, with some of the things late in game where maybe you talk about the pressure where the Reds needed something from De La Cruz, and I think you pointed out there were some times he took some pitches that Ellie De La Cruz typically pounces on, or at least swings. Where do you see his feel for his game and the new players or the players currently surrounding him in the lineup right now?
Ellie De La Cruz sometimes has the game speed up on him. And listen, there's a lot of weight in the role that he has. We heard a couple days ago on this podcast, we talked about Trevino, or we heard from Trevino talking about just the weight that Ellie De La Cruz is shouldering in this lineup. Ellie now reminds me of how Hunter Green started last season. Hunter Green had a shaky, he had some rough outings in there, and then he turned a corner and he was not. I mean, so was Ellie, but you know exactly where I'm going with that. He's posted a 1 ERA since July 1st. I talked to Derek Johnson the other day, and I think I brought this up on Monday's podcast. DJ said that the difference with Hunter this year is just the consistency, knowing the prep, the work, the details he has to wrinkle out and how he can anticipate them. There are all of these very, very small things that has helped Hunter avoid the lulls. And DJ said the consistency, that's the thing about the season Hunter Green's having. From the first day of spring training to now, he hasn't had a bad day. And yes, Hunter will have a not good start eventually, but you know exactly where I'm going with that. Those are the edges that Hunter's rounded out, and he's in what is his fourth year in the big leagues. Ellie, some less experience. He's having a lull, and it's a part of his lack of time to develop in the minor leagues. It's because he hasn't just been developing in the big leagues. He's been developing in the big leagues as the team's best player with all that comes with that. And you just see it. And he had a couple of these last season. He had one of these in April of last season. I remember a game against the Phillies that stood out, and he actually got hot after that. So it's just part of where he is, and kind of the takeaway is it's almost on the rest of the team to help support that when Ellie is kind of having one of these lulls.
I'm going to write this down because I think when I heard you say this, I think I need to revisit this throughout the season. I think anyone watching the Reds, they need to revisit this throughout the course of a long season, that Ellie De La Cruz, all-star, superstar, freak athletically, freak of a baseball player, doing amazing things, packing the ballpark, bringing people to their feet for, a middle of the game at bat on a Tuesday night, chanting Ellie De La Cruz. Ellie De La Cruz is developing at the major league level as the team's best player. Think about the contrast of that, of developing at this level and doing it while your development process is certainly at a higher level than all or most of your teammates. I think that's a great way to remind ourselves of what Ellie De La Cruz is and where he is right now in this amazing process that his career is going to be.
Now, one thing is he's running less this year. The Reds as a whole are running less.
Exactly.
And this isn't a bad thing. This is a totally fine thing. Like, we see this all the time with franchise quarterbacks change the way they play, the style, the way they approach the game based on the type of game scripts that their head coaches would like to follow. Like, Joe Burrow would be a completely different player if you were playing for Mike Vrabel. Burrow would still be an awesome player, but Mike Vrabel coached teams just play a different style of game. And the Reds are playing a different style of game this year. And it's interesting to see Ellie evolve into that. Again, like, that's fine. Ellie's still great. Ellie will be great. And Francona's a Hall of Fame manager, and Ellie transcends any offense or any style of whatever, and it's all going to be fine. But that has been something I've kept track of too. Moments where Ellie is not approaching the game differently, but is in a situation to approach the game differently based upon kind of the team fundamentals and identity that the Reds have tried to establish this year, changing from last year.
Let's circle back to the pitching staff. And I have a note here on the pitching staff. Even having given up 16 runs in the last 2 games of the series against Seattle, the Reds have still given up the fewest runs in the division, the 3rd fewest runs in the National League. We know how good, the starting rotation for the most part has been, but I think there's a question right now watching Nick Martinez. And this is another player that I think, there is no panic about anything. And I'm not insinuating in any way that I want to get into this conversation with that being the way we get in. But for Martinez, you can see some of the frustration clearly on his face after his starts, already allowing the most hits in the starting rotation, almost twice as many runs allowed as the next closest member of the rotation. He'll get his next start in his hometown of Miami on Monday. I like that.
That'll be good. He needs that.
He needs that. And that's that's kind of where I'm going with this. I think he needs that, something that he needs to get over a little bit of some early season frustration, knowing how much pressure I think he's put on himself returning to the Reds to be one of the guys in a great rotation that really can help lead the way. And he did last year. I think he still can in a lot of ways. What about Martinez so far from what you've seen?
Martinez, it's obviously not to the extent of Spencer Steer, but I believe in Steer and I believe in Martinez, 2 guys whose whole thing is they're the epitome of consistency in situations where it's difficult to be consistent, especially when you look at kind of the versatility and the constant availability that they both provide they both bring to the table, obviously in completely different roles. It's been weird for Martinez. It was the 3rd time through the order thing with him kind of getting a little fatigued down the stretch. Then it was the Mariners had a game plan that he just wasn't expecting, and they hit some early pitch strikes. He's spinning the ball very well. His command is exactly where you need it to be. You'd probably want to see some more electricity out of that changeup, which when it's rolling is truly one of the best changeups in baseball. Like, I don't say that lightly. That's probably the next thing for him. Maybe get a little more swing and miss. Again, have that kind of, not edge in terms of his competitiveness, but kind of edge to kind of, kind of a trump card type of thing would be big for Martinez. And we've seen that from him a million times. His changeup's his signature pitch. It's why he's here in the big leagues. And kind of getting back to that will probably be another step from him. But it's funny too. Like, I would see, like, there's a much, much, much more likely chance that someone gets hurt than everyone stays healthy. And, all right, now Louder comes back and takes that spot. Like, there's a much, much, much more likely scenario where either someone gets hurt or Martinez just gets rolling, then Martinez ends up losing his rotation spot at any point over the next month or 2.
Did you hear that?
I did.
That's the transition bell here. Let's take a quick break and talk about your travel experience. The second road trip of the season. We talked about your attire, which we now know is planned well in advance of a road series or a series at home. So Baltimore, do you have any go-to spots for this stop on the tour of Charlie Goldsmith?
I went for a walk down the Inner Harbor before the show.
Excellent spot.
Moe's is a spot the Bengals scribes often go to.
Yep.
It's funny, like it's crawfish kind of stuff. I don't eat shellfish, which is fine. So I end up like everyone's surprised. Wait, you got the cod? And I'm like, yeah, it's delicious. So then maybe next time someone else gets the cod, and I'm starting a little army off to the side. And then the Italian district, I think, is really neat. It's a fun place to walk around. Some nice little spots.
What do you think about Camden Yards?
Camden Yards is beautiful. This will actually be the first series. I've been 5 times to Baltimore for a Ravens game. This will actually be the first series. I made a point before the Thursday night game to walk through Camden Yards because they do a lot of tailgate stuff there. And you got I believe it's Utah Street with an EUTAH. I think it's something like that. It's just old in the best way. It's authentic. The statues, I think they do a great job incorporating the history into the way that kind of environment feels. And I look forward to spending a lot more time there this weekend.
Camden Yards kind of started it all in terms of stadium feel and kind of the return to what maybe an older ballpark when that happened in the 90s, right?
Quick fact. I think the guy responsible for that, Lucino, I believe is his last name, then became the not president, but basically the guy who ran the Red Sox on the day-to-day basis when Francona was the Red Sox manager. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's a whole book about their relationship, Terry Francona and Larry Lucchino.
Man, been in the game that long, you intertwine stories all over the place. I think of the warehouse, the warehouses beyond the outfield and the home, Junior hitting balls off the warehouse. I look forward to that. That's going to be good. Also, certainly, we spent so much time talking about Austin Hayes, spent 6+ seasons in Baltimore, was an all-star there in 2023. There's certainly, I think, going to be some juice for him in this series going back to that team.
A couple things on Hayes. First, I mentioned like the canary in the coal mine in the outfield market. One of those guys certainly was Tyler O'Neill. I believe he got 3 for 50. A flawed player, but definitely but definitely a power hitter. And he earned 3 for 50, however many $1 million a year that is. He was one of those mid-profile outfield free agents that got a lot of money, that had the Reds ended up in a buy low scenario with Austin Hayes. Of course, the team that had that spot for O'Neill because they traded Hayes in 2024 to the Phillies. And then Hayes, one more thing on him. Hayes' biggest enemy in Baltimore was that massive wall they had in left field. I believe they called it the Wall-timore, which is a bad pun, but that's what they called it. Deep, far, a deterrent to hitters in free agency from the right side to sign in Baltimore. Took away like 10 home runs a year from Austin Hayes, who's a really strong pull hitter with the power that we've seen. So they actually moved the wall in this year, and that was a part of the reason that O'Neill was willing to sign there, because it wasn't some pitcher's paradise where he wouldn't be able to hit for homers. So I'm interested, does Austin clear the left field wall now that gave him so much trouble when he was in Baltimore?
For the YouTube audience, Chaz, obviously, as we've discussed, is on the road in his Baltimore hotel room where he kind of big-timed the person at the front desk for an early check-in. But I mean, how could you say no?
I just showed him the photo of Power Stacks with Giesens, Law, and Goldsmith. And he goes, that's you guys?
Yeah. He goes, oh, that's you guys. He was immediately impressed, and you're obviously settled in and getting ready for game day. The change at Casa de Giesenslaw is there's a little painting project going on that was part of a repair project that dates back some time. And so I've been moved out of the basement into an office that's in the process of being painted, just to kind of set the stage for that. We kind of blew through the fact that was Charlie's notebook. I never want to diminish the significance of Charlie's notebook, which travels.
You know who asked me about my notebook yesterday?
Who's
Nick
that?
Kroll. He's like, man, Charlie, the notebook looks like it's in rough shape, and I'll show it here. I mean, you got the spine kind of, you got the glue that holds the spine together falling apart. You got the fronts kind of getting ripped up. And I said, Nick, my notebook is kind of like an elbow, the elbow ligament, the UCL that we see. Like right when it gives out, you just replace it and start anew. And then you're stronger than ever. And so I'm this notebook's starting to wear down, and then we'll do the Tommy John replacements coming up here. Maybe probably after the NFL draft, I'll get a new notebook.
Well, just make sure you keep us posted, because that'll be of significance to this show and the things that we do on this show, because obviously we have an entire segment named after Charlie's Notebook, so we're all deeply invested in Charlie's Notebook, so we need to know about any changes. So that's the Notebook. Let's go to Tito's top 1 or 2 this week, because Terry Francona for this team will be a story, will be good for Nuggets, will be good for our baseball experience, I believe. And a lot of what we've talked about with Francona, and again, this week, that's where we're headed, is just kind of observing Francona as a manager. He walks in, to this situation with the Reds. He's Hall of Fame manager Terry Francona, because that's certainly where he's headed. He's got this track record of success. He has a track record of how he deals with players, with media. We're starting to get a feel for that in terms of the pre and post game access and the conversations we have with him. But we also observe how he goes about his business, how he manages games, how he does this and that. And I think early in the season, we've had a couple of examples recently of observing how someone of Terry Francona's stature, which certainly extends not just to fans, players, media, the guys who work the games, umpires, are aware of how long he's been around, how long they've each dealt with him, his level of success, whatever his reputation is with that group. What have we seen in terms of how he handles umpires on the occasion of asking about a call, questioning a call, or pushing back on a call? What have we seen there?
He's establishing what I call a public line of credit. So on Monday, Alexis Díaz comes in and he had the shaky season debut that we discussed. And Francona mentions, well, I thought several of those pitches were strikes. And not every manager even alludes to the fact that they would disagree to a single call by an umpire. Francona, he's willing to, if there's a call he disagrees with, does that. I believe there was also a safe out tag that involved Jamer Candelario at one point that Francona said, yep, that's not how I saw it. And that's supporting your players. That's showing your opinion. But you can't just be the guy who says, I disagree, because then you're kind of like the boy who cried wolf. So then on Tuesday, there's the Austin Hayes catcher's interference, controversy. And what does Terry Francona do? He said, the umpire explained it to me and I understand it. And I got where he was coming from and the call made sense. I mean, that's, the both sides. That kind of gives Francona, I'm going to trust when he said, not that I would, but you understand, some like Zach Taylor would never say that he disagrees with a call. And so when he says, I agreed with the call, you're thinking, did he really agree with that call? And that's just part of his approach with the media. Terry's going to be the kind of manager who, if he says he agrees with the call, he agreed with it. If he says he disagreed with the call, he disagreed with it. And again, look at Zach Taylor. Those are very different styles of kind of the public message when it comes to controversial calls.
You don't want to be the boy who cried wolf. You also don't want to be the canary in the coal mine.
Really don't want to be the canary in the coal mine.
I don't want to be anything in the coal mine, but it's been interesting to watch Terry Francona and how he's handled that. I get it. I get exactly what you're saying. And again, we continue to watch for things like that. So the Reds spend the weekend in Baltimore. The Orioles, quick thought on the competition for the weekend, certainly expected to contend in that division. Gunnar Henderson, Cedric Mullins, Adley Rutschman, not to mention some of the pitching. They come in kind of about record-wise, about where the Reds are. You have a quick nutshell preview of this series.
Yeah, their question is, they're the anti-Reds, a deep lineup with a lot of power options. Can the rotation have enough consistency, durability, and length from their starting pitching to hold up? And they're not quite vulnerable, like they're not the Marlins, but it is a bit of a vulnerable pitching staff and kind of an opportunity for the Reds to build on some of the momentum they started to create at the plate against Seattle.
All right. Also, for the YouTube audience, I've failed to shout out to my Columbus Blue Jackets, a fantastic, emotional season in Columbus that wrapped up 1 point short of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Proud of those guys. Enjoy that experience. Now it's full steam ahead for the spring and summer with the old Redlegs downtown at the Great American Ballpark.
I'll be there.
I'll be there. You'll be there. And we hope you'll join us for the next edition of Power Stacks. Wherever you get your podcasts, check out Power Stacks. Please subscribe. Please like, watch on YouTube. As Chaz always says, share it with a friend. We hope you've had fun, and we'll see you next time. Take care.